Well, good morning, One Life. How you doing? There's something about preaching at your home church that's exciting. I've been going around preaching at a bunch of different places, and nothing's more exciting and nothing's more honoring than getting to preach at the church that you call home, the family that you call your own, that you get to come. And every time you're at home from school, every time I'm in South Carolina, I want to go, well, how's One Life doing? How are we doing? And I call Dad all the time because I love One Life. So if you don't know a little bit about us, we're from Kentucky, so go Wildcats. We got a big win yesterday, woo! And now we live here in South Carolina, and I go to school in Virginia, Liberty University, which is in Lynchburg, Virginia. And fun fact, big moment happened in my life. I just got engaged. You should be able to see it, yeah. Woo! It was great, a very big step, and I can't wait to get married and step into that new chapter in my life. I am so excited about this message. I don't really know how to explain it. I love giving messages. I love preaching, but there's something about being here at One Life and a certain love that I have in my heart for One Life. I genuinely believe that this sermon, that the word that I feel like God's given me, has the ability to change and impact each and every one of our lives. So let's pray. Jesus, I ask you to speak to every person in this room. You know what they're going through. You know what they're feeling. You know what's going on in each and every one of our hearts, the depths of our hearts. I ask that they feel you and they hear you. I hope that you help my words to fade. If they're not from you, help them to be forgotten. But help your words to stick, to be remembered, to be applied. Help us that you can help us to be transformed by your word, that we can feel changed and impacted. And we love you and we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so how many of you guys have ever started something out great and then it got really hard? Like, I know about, for me, like a workout plan or something, you know, when you're like, oh, this is about to be awesome, I'm going to start this workout plan. And then like 2 weeks in, you don't even remember your card to go to the gym, like you're done already. Or maybe it's like a diet. That's for me. I'm like, I'm going to go. I don't know if anybody knows Raising Cane's, but like I would be like, oh, I'm going to go to Raising Cane's like once a month, and I'd end up like 4 times in 4 days, and I was like, geez, it's not going well. Maybe it's a budget, or maybe it's a relationship where you're like, oh, this person's great. 3 days later, you're blocking them on every social media. Like it didn't work. Well, I have a friend who went through a substantial version of this. His name was Dan. My friend Dan went to college with me, and Dan's a really cool guy, but he doesn't like running, okay? Like, he played football and he played lineman. And the funny thing was he was like small and skinny, but he played lineman because he hated to run. And Dan was a fun guy, but Dan also got excited about stuff. So you could kind of impassion Dan to do whatever it was. Like you could get him to jump off a bridge. Like he would literally do whatever you want if he just got excited enough. And one time, his friend Bryce sat him down and he was getting all excited. And he said, Dan, we're about to do this awesome thing. We're going to get up. We're going to get all ready. We're going to get this sign. We're going to get a little sticker. We're going to get our little clothes, and we're going to go run a half marathon. He said, it's about to be the best thing ever. We're all going to go eat. There'll be other friends. You might get a girlfriend. It'll be really fun. You get to go. It'll be super fun. And Dan got like really envisioned, like really motivated. He got all excited. And Dan made a decision that he shouldn't have made. Dan, he got online, he signed up, and he made a non-refundable deposit. $50. Bad idea. You shouldn't do that if you don't like running. There's also one other problem. This was Thursday night, and the half marathon was Saturday morning. And so the next day, it's Friday. They're all excited. This part I'm not making up. It sounds like I'm making it up. And they were all like, yo, we got to at least practice once. You haven't ran in 5 years. And he literally, last time he ran was in football when they made him run sprints. And his friends were like, at least just run one time. We can run 1 mile. It won't even be bad. You can just do it. And he didn't want to, so he was all excited. And then his other friend, when they were about to run, called him and said, look, IHOP has the all-you-can-eat pancakes for $5. $5, all you can eat. And Dan said, all right, I'll meet you there. And he got in the car to go run with the people, and he just went straight to IHOP. And so Dan Went to IHOP. He didn't practice at all. And Saturday morning, he gets there. He's all excited. He's stretching. He's doing all the Usain Bolt stuff. He thinks he's about to be good. He's got his little sign on. He's got like the Nike Dry Fit. He was all pumped. And Dan gets in the starting block. You know how everyone at the start of a little marathon's like not really like in it because there's not like a track race. You just kind of get there and you're kind of ready to sprint. You know how he's the only one all pumped and he's like leaning forward and they're all looking at him like he's never done this before. And he's getting all excited and he says it starts. He says he starts running and he's doing good. He said he's looking around. He's like, man, these people are slow. And he's going real fast and he thinks he's doing good. And he said, I won't say the amount of distance, but he said just a little bit in, he remembers looking around and everybody else was seemingly getting faster and he was getting slower. And he said, but the problem is I'm trying twice as hard as I was. He said eventually he started to hurt in places he'd never hurt. He said he started to feel things he never thought he could feel, say things he never said. He said he definitely thought things that he never thought he would think before. Now, this is pretty silly. Like, you would look at him and go, Dan, what are you doing? Why are you running a day and a half after you just heard about a marathon? And you should prepare. And I think that in our lives, we have this same epidemic. I think it's easy for us. We start an amazing race with God. We really jump out of our faith boat. We get excited. We start a journey with Jesus. And we start going for it. We start walking after Jesus. We start following Jesus. And then it gets really hard. Our situations get tough. Our life gets tough. Life hits. Finances, work, family, they hit. And it kind of sucks. And you're like, man, I thought following Jesus would be easier than this. And I think in a serious manner, a lot of times we ask God, like, God, why is it so hard? Like, why isn't it easier? Like, I thought you loved me. Why is it so hard? Or why, I've personally thought, why does it feel like the more that I follow after Jesus, the harder it gets? The more I choose to follow and represent Jesus, especially around people that aren't Christ followers, why does it get so much harder? Well, the good news is this is not a new question. In fact, this question, this wondering of why it gets so hard, has been around since the beginning. And I believe that for us Christians, the answer is found in the Bible. I believe it's found in a story in Matthew. It's Matthew 14. You can go there if you want, but I'm going to introduce it for a little bit. But it's a pretty cool story. So just to kind of set it up, Jesus has just been preaching to 5,000 men. Now it's just men, so they think it might have been 15 to 20,000 with the women and children. And he has just preached to all these people. And not only has he preached, but they were all getting hungry, and they didn't have any food. And all the disciples were like, yo, you should send them home. And he was like, man, why do we got to send them home? And this little kid comes up with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And Jesus takes that food, and he feeds all these 15 to 20,000 people, and there's 12 full-size basket left over. Like, literally this high is what they think, like a triple hamper. Like, this high, that's how much food is left over. Way more than, it literally, they were like, oh my gosh. They also say this like 20 times in the Bible, but they're like, oh my gosh, truly, he is the Son of God. He is the Messiah. They're like, it must be him. And they get so excited that all the people are about to make him king, about to force him to become king. Even the disciples are getting that excited. And Jesus, it says, slips away and he sends them all home. Now, all the disciples at this time are like, Jesus, what are you doing? Like, they all love you. Why are you sending them home? And Jesus says, I got to go pray. And then Jesus does something even more unexpected. He says, you disciples, you go head across the Sea of Galilee. I'll meet you on the other side. Now, it's getting kind of near night. And they're kind of like, we're good. Like, we'd rather go with you. And we kind of give them slack a lot, but you do want to remember, 6 months earlier, 6 chapters earlier too, they were literally in the boat with Jesus, and they all thought they were going to die. Like, he was asleep. They thought they were dead. Now he's telling them, here's a step beyond. Go ahead, and I'll meet you. And this is nerve-wracking for each of them, but eventually they listen. So, as we remember, they've just got on this boat, and they're heading across the ocean. And there's one other thing you want to know. The actual Sea of Galilee itself. Okay, the Sea of Galilee, if you don't know, is the second lowest place, or second lowest lake on Earth. It's 700 feet below sea level. The only place deeper is the Dead Sea. And it's kind of in this bowl, okay? So picture it surrounded. It's like a valley, but all on all sides. And what this means is when there's high winds, the heavier winds, because of gravity, gets pushed into the bowl. So you can literally be on the beach of the Sea of Galilee, sipping a margarita or whatever, chilling there, and within minutes, literally within minutes, it says what's something equivalent to a tropical storm can show up. It says over 10-foot waves can just appear out of nowhere. You can literally be there entirely calm, peaceful, chilling. Oh, this is great, taking pictures. And next thing you know, like it's Florida. You've seen Florida. It's kind of like that. Immediately, you get hit. And so it is a pretty dangerous place. People would die regularly, especially back in the old days when they didn't have near as good boats. They would just flip and be gone. So that's the Sea of Galilee. So we'll jump. We're in Matthew 14, 23 through 33. So you got to remember, Jesus has just preached all these people. It's all exciting. They're all pumped. And Jesus says, I'm going to go pray. You go across the sea. So it says, after he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone. And the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, they think it was like 4 a.m. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage. It is I. He's like saying, I am. I'm the God that you know. I am. Don't be afraid. Then Peter, Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying again, truly, you are the Son of God. Now, that's a pretty outstanding passage. Like, nobody walks on water. Like, we all know that. You just can't walk on water. You can kind of look like it, but you can't walk on water. So there's like 10 sermons out of this passage. But what I want you to notice is at the end of verse 29, the start of verse 30, Peter has just walked on water. Like straight up, not like on logs or like kind of floated a little bit with some special hover shoes or anything. Like the man was on water. And Jesus was walking on water too. And he invited Peter to come. Now imagine the courage and strength that Peter had to have to get out of the boat and have the faith to trust Jesus. That's a pretty big step. I don't know if I would do that in the middle of an actual wind. And the idea was back then he probably couldn't swim very well. Like he could swim a little bit, but he probably would have died. Like that was the idea. If he got out and sunk, he was gone. And Peter was willing to get out of the boat and come toward Jesus. But I want you to notice, later Jesus says, you have little faith. He says, this big first step that you made to get out of the boat, that's the little piece. The hard piece is walking on the water with Jesus. Now, I can kind of imagine Peter in this scenario. I can kind of imagine Peter, he's walking on the boat. He's walking on the water. He's getting all pumped. He's probably freaked out. All the disciples are like, what is happening? They're all like, he's a ghost. He's possessed. They're all freaked out. And Peter's walking on the boat. And then I can imagine something happens. Maybe like a big wave crashes, or like he gets splashed in the face with some water, or maybe like the wind blows him over a little bit, or like some piece of thunder cracks real loud, or like lightning hits real hard. And it kind of jolts him. And it says he takes his eyes off of Jesus. We don't even know if it happened on purpose, but he takes his eyes off of him. And this brings me to my first point, which is that Peter loses focus on Jesus. Now, what we got to understand here is the wind and the waves, his situation didn't change. When he got out of the boat, there was a very big storm. It wasn't like it was like calm and then he got out of the boat and then it got hard. It was already crazy. There was already heavy, heavy storm going on. There was wind, there was waves, there was thunder, there was lightning. It was happening. It was scary. But what changed was where Peter focused his eyes. Okay, so now I have an illustration for this that might be a little tough for some of us. It's about football. Currently, I'm sad. I'm a Cowboys fan. We got trounced on Thanksgiving. I'm an Alabama fan. We just got knocked out of the playoffs. So overall, it's been a tough one. Maybe you're in the same boat as a South Carolina fan. I'm with you. Clemson fan, I hope you guys lose real soon. But trust me, football is something that I've loved, okay? How many of you guys would also say you like football? Raise your hand. Oh, yeah, we got a lot of people. I love football. I've grown up loving it my whole life. In fact, I grew up playing it, and I know you can't tell, I'm a little bigger now, but I was a quarterback, and I was actually semi-successful at it. And I can remember growing up, and I was learning, and I remember I was at this camp, okay? I'm pretty sure it was a camp. It was like this Peyton Manning. Oh, it might not have been Peyton. It was a little camp, okay? And I remember this coach kind of sat me down. He said, Corey, you got a lot of physical talent, but quarterbacks, the best quarterbacks, aren't the best physically. I don't know if you know who Tom Brady is or Joe Montana or any of those famous guys, Dan Marino. He said they weren't the best throwers. They weren't the most powerful. They weren't the most accurate. Heck, they weren't even the smartest. He said the best quarterbacks were the best focusers. He said the best quarterbacks are able to avoid the noise. He said no matter what stage it was on, no matter how big it was, whether it was a Super Bowl or a preseason game, no matter if all the receivers had dropped every pass before, their whole past had been terrible, no matter if the future was looking great or if the game was going well, if the score was high or not, whatever down it is, whatever distance it was, they're able to focus on each and every play. That no matter what it is, they were able to focus and do their job. Then he said a line I'll never forget. He looked at me and he said, Corey, a quarterback who has lost his focus has lost the game. And I was like, when I was little, I didn't really understand. I was like, okay, what's that mean? But I think now I realize, obviously that's true for football, but I think it's true for us Christians too. I think as Christians, when we take our eyes off Jesus, when we lose our focus of Jesus, we become defeated Christians. I think the point of Christianity, I think the whole reason is that we keep our eyes on our Savior and on our Lord. And I think it's really easy to do. I mean, how easy is it to get, because the world's tough. Like we all know, we're in a movie theater right now. Every time we go to the movie theater, it's so easy to get our eyes off of Jesus. We have hard family lives. We have hard relationships. We have hard finances. We have hard jobs. And it's so easy to get our eyes off of Jesus. But the thing is, it wasn't just that Peter lost his focus on Jesus. There's a second part to this. What happens is Peter takes his eyes off of Jesus, but then consequently, Peter refocuses on his surroundings. Peter refocuses on his surroundings. Now, if you look at verse 30, it says, but when he saw the wind. Now, the word saw in English really doesn't do the Greek word any favors. The Greek word is kind of like this idea, it's like a literal but also metaphorical term. It's like this idea that while I literally saw, I metaphorically saw. And the exact definition that they give for this is, where is it? Here we go. To purposely direct one's mind or mind's eye toward. It's like the idea is he put his entire mind and focused it on the wind and the waves. He didn't just see the wind, he focused on the wind. And I think we can do this in our lives so often. I mean, heck, think about driving, okay? I know all you guys are the best drivers of all time, and I'm the worst. That's okay. But when you're driving, we won't even bring up the whole texting and driving. That's okay. But when you're driving, you know when you pass, like maybe it's like a cool mountain or like a landmark or a city. Maybe it's just me, but you like kind of focus on it. You can kind of glance at it and stay on the road. But if you look for a little bit and you turn back and you're like totally in the wrong lane, you're like, what is happening, bro? Like, I'm not supposed to be in this lane. And maybe that's just me, or maybe, just maybe you would use your phone and like, you can glance at your phone, but if you look at your phone and try to text and look up, you're over here like face on with a semi, you're like, what the? And you got to get over. I think that happens a lot, but I think that's what Peter's saying. I think that's what happens. Peter, he can glance at the waves. He can notice the wind and the waves, but what happened was when you focus on the winds and the waves, when you focus on the circumstances and the situations in your life, it's really easy to start losing our direction, to lose where we're going towards. You know, you can kind of say, I can kind of hold my phone up here and kind of see, but if I focus on the phone, no matter what you're doing, you can't go in the same general direction. You're still going to get off. You're you're still going to be going the wrong way. That happens all the time. Maybe it's just me driving. Maybe you guys are all perfect. That's okay. But I think what happens is we end up asking this question all the time, like, okay, well, are you focused? And I don't think that's the right question. I don't think the question is whether you're focused, but I think it's what are you focused on? You know, I think you can be focused, but focused on the wrong thing. And I think we do this all the freaking time. But you might be hearing me and you might go, okay, Corey, but that's cool. You know, I kind of think that I could kind of like maybe peripherally focus on Jesus, but as long as I focused on like good things, I can still kind of get going towards the direction of Jesus and be okay. And what my point would be is, I think it's more that our focus determines what we follow. That's my third point. I think our focus determines what we follow. See, when Peter focused on the winds and the waves, his fear made him afraid. Now, don't get it wrong. There was fear there the whole time. He was courageous. He was brave. That's what courage and bravery is. That's what makes our military so brave. It's getting out and doing something in the face of fear. You know what I'm saying? Like, it makes you stupid if you go into a war and you're not afraid. But what makes you courageous and brave is you say, oh, I'm scared, but I'm going to step out anyway. That's what courage and bravery looks like. And I think that's what happens here with Peter, because at first when he gets out of the boat, he's scared. Trust me, the winds and the waves are big. He could drown. He knows that. But he's getting out in face of that. But what happens is when he focuses on it, when he focuses on what he's afraid of, he becomes afraid. He becomes entirely fearful, and he falls into his fear and follows his fear. Now, I have a fun illustration. How many of you guys know another language? Semi, at least a little bit. Raise your hand. Oh, wow. Okay, this is gonna be funny. Okay. My whole life, I grew up in Spanish class, okay? It was kind of a requirement at my high school. I took it all through middle school and all through high school. And I got good grades. I went to every class. I listened. I took notes. I sat in the front. I always got good grades. I did good on the quizzes, the talking, the speaking, everything. I did pretty good. And I remember one time it occurred to me that maybe, just maybe, my focus was wrong. When we had a field trip in class, I just thought of this last night, and it was very funny. We went to a restaurant for class. This restaurant was called El Toro, and it was like a Mexican restaurant. It was exciting, but the one rule was you had to entirely speak in Spanish while you were there. You couldn't say anything in English. This was hard for me because I'm not good at Spanish. I thought I was. But I got there, and I remember we were getting all excited. We're all sitting down, and we're kind of talking, but you don't really say much except the end. Like, that's it. That's all I knew. And I remember the waitress came over, and she was like, what do you want? In Spanish. And I was all nervous. I didn't know what to say. I was like, taco. But I didn't really know anything other than taco, and I didn't want a taco. And I was all nervous. And I remember she looked at me, and I was really embarrassed. So I didn't know what to say. And I just looked at her, and I said, soy, which means I am. I said, muy embarazado. Muy embarazado. And I kept looking at her. And she was laughing at me. And I was like, what is this? And I remember looking around, and my teacher's laughing. All my friends are laughing. Everybody's laughing at me. And I was like, what is this? And they wouldn't tell me. And I just kept telling them. I forgot even how to say sorry. But I was like, sorry, soy muy embarazado. And what happened was, nobody told me. So the whole day we were doing that. And I remember going, when we were about to leave, because they wouldn't speak in Spanish the whole time. I would speak in English. And I remember when I got outside, my teacher looked at me and she goes, you know what that means, right? And I was like, yeah, I'm really embarrassed. And she goes, no, it means I'm very pregnant. And I was like, that makes sense. And I looked a lot less pregnant then than I do now. But the idea, it was very embarrassing. And I was like, oh, geez. And that's when I realized, I think my focus in that class, I think my focus in Spanish class had never been on learning Spanish. I think it was getting good grades. And the thing was, I focused on getting good grades, and I got good grades. I got what I strove for. And I think we do that all the time. But I remember saying the whole time I was like, yeah, I'll learn Spanish. But if I continue to get good grades, I'll keep taking the classes, and then I'll eventually learn it. Kind of like peripheral or secondary. I'll learn Spanish. Never worked. I know, hola. That's it. And caliente para esos. Have you ever heard of that? Yeah, my dad made that up. Yeah, my dad made that up in Mexico. It's not real. It's totally fake. But I know that word. We don't know what it means. But the thing was, I didn't learn a thing. I thought I would. Secondarily, I would learn Spanish. And I think we do this in our lives all the time. Like, for example, maybe it's like when you're working, you focus on your paycheck, earning a paycheck rather than working. You kind of don't get anything done. Or maybe you focus on your kids' good behavior rather than their heart, and you wonder why later they're kind of reacting the way they are. Or maybe, and this one's easy for me, is you focus on looking godly rather than being godly. And looking godly is not bad, but it's missing the point. Or maybe you focus on doing for God rather than loving and following Jesus. It's so easy because we say, oh, these are good things, but we miss the point, and we end up not even getting what we strove for in the beginning. But I think there's a fix. I think what Peter does here, see, we kind of look at this story and we give Peter flack all the time. We're like, this dude was walking on water and he sunk after like 3 steps. What is he doing? But I think there's a fix. I think there's actually an answer. And the first part, there's like 2, but it's kind of like the same reaction. But the first part that really stands out to me is Peter, it says, beginning to sink, he immediately turns to Jesus. And I think this is where we fall short, especially in the South. I think it's really easy that we say, we're going to tighten up my bootstraps. I'm going to figure this out, and I'm going to get better at whatever it is. Then I'll go to God. And I think what Peter does is instead of when he starts sinking, he doesn't start swimming, trying to get himself to the top. He doesn't kind of grab hold of something to kind of keep himself afloat. What he does is he immediately turns to Jesus. And sometimes with us, we have our work is consuming us, or our family's exhausting, especially at Thanksgiving, I understand that. Or maybe your circumstances are really overwhelming. And what happens is you end up trying to figure it out yourself. You kind of go, this is a little too small for God. I can swim myself. I can dig myself out of this one. This one isn't that big. It's just it's just work. It's going to be tough. And we don't turn to God. And I think that's what amazing, humility looks like with Peter. He doesn't say, I want to beat it myself. He turns to Jesus. And then secondly, what he does, he has the humility to cry out to Jesus. He cries out in verse 30, he says, Lord, save me. Now, this is pretty profound because Peter doesn't choose to explain himself. He doesn't say, Peter, Jesus, I was walking towards you, but then the winds got big. Or I'm sorry, I really tried. Or man, if somebody else was with me. He doesn't make excuses. He doesn't explain himself. He simply says, Lord, save me. And it kind of convicted me. When I was writing this, it made me think, do I have the humility to cry out to God? Especially when it's something tough like this. When I made a mistake and I'm sinking because I focused on the wrong thing, do I have the humility to say, okay, God, save me, help me, I'm drowning. It's so easy to try to fix it ourselves. Because maybe right now you're in a hard relationship, or maybe you're going through something with your family, or maybe you're going through something that's unspeakable. You can't really tell people what's going on in your life, but you can say, yeah, pray for me. But you can't really speak about it because it's so tough. And the thing is, there's something beautiful about the fact that Peter in this story is the closest disciple to Jesus. Now you might look at it and go, man, he's sinking out in the middle of a storm, and all the other disciples are safe. But I think Peter's out on the water, and he's sinking with Jesus because he knows that the best place for him to be is out on the water with Jesus. It's not the best place for him to be safe in the boat, far from Jesus. It's to be close. Even when he's struggling, even when he's sinking, the best spot for him to be is with Jesus, who's the master of the winds. He's the master of the waves and the water. He's the master of your situations and your circumstances and your problems. He's the master in that place. And I think that's big because then it gives me the humility and it makes me go, okay, if Peter, kind of the crazy disciple, the one who kind of overspoke and said a bunch of things that he probably shouldn't have said all the time, that's what they all viewed him as. But if Peter had the humility to cry out, Lord, save me. I can't do it. I'm done. He just simply says, Lord, save me, and trusts it to the one who is powerful enough to handle his situation. So I ask you, Is there maybe an area in your life where you could maybe open your mind to the reality that maybe, open your heart maybe to the reality that maybe, just maybe, you might need Jesus' help in that area? Maybe it's your work. Maybe you're having a tough time with finances. Maybe you're having a tough time with your social life in general. But maybe what you need is to turn and let Jesus be the master. Let him be the master. And then second, maybe consider what it would mean for you to actually keep your eyes on Jesus and focus on Jesus in that area, not focus on your surroundings in the hard areas, because we all have that. Or maybe it's just church. Maybe you don't know Jesus. Maybe you're here and this is your first time and you've never really considered what it would mean to follow Jesus, which is totally fine. I'm glad you're here. So glad you're here. And maybe it would mean, what would it mean for me to actually follow Jesus rather than follow whatever I'm following? Myself, my desires, my dreams, all good things. But they should be done in sight and through the compass of Jesus. And I think that's important. So, remember earlier when I told you about Dan? Dan's a fun guy. He's a really nice guy. He's also very bald, and he's like 20, actually balding. And as Dan was running this half marathon, Dan was getting it. And he says he was feeling it, and he was all running, and everybody was kind of looking at him like, who is this guy? Why is he running? He said, while he was slowing down, he said, I don't know if you guys have ever run a half marathon or a 5K or whatever, but there's usually like a person in the back, like a kind of caboose person that works for whatever, that kind of keeps the rear coming up. And he said he remembers, and he knew that he was really struggling when he looked over, and that person was kind of next to him and was like, screw this guy, and just kept going right past him. And he said Dan was doing so bad. He said he literally was hurting so bad. He said he literally thought he was going to have an asthma attack, even though he didn't have asthma. He said now I have asthma, and I feel like I would have an asthma attack running a half marathon. But he said he literally felt like he couldn't make it. He was like, I'm actually going to die. I will not make it. And he said, while he was running, he said, as there was no human being in sight, you got to get that part. He said, literally everybody had just moved on past him. He said he was literally just by himself, just like barely moving. He said, it was like Michael Scott, if anybody's seen that episode of The Office, where he's literally just, he got all excited with the pasta, and then eventually he just couldn't do anything. And this is where my friend Dan was. He was so worn out. He was so tired. What he did was he called his friend, and he said, okay, you come pick me up. I'm done. And he got in a car, and he drove off. Here's the funny thing. Guess how far he was through the whole half marathon? 1 mile. And that's what he said. I have a feeling it was a whole lot less than a mile. But he couldn't make it. He said it was so far. He said when his car pulled up, he knew it was a car because he couldn't hear any other sounds. He said there was no other humans. He couldn't even hear the other people running or talking. He said they were so far ahead, he just had to get in the car and leave. Now, that's funny. I don't know what he was doing, why he thought it was ever a good idea to run a half marathon without ever practicing and eating IHOP the day before, endless pancakes. But I think in our life, it's easy to kind of think like that. It's easy to go, man, why don't I just quit? And maybe right now you're kind of on the precipice of quitting. You're kind of at the spot where, it might just be easier for me to get back in the boat. It might be easier for me to bail. It might be easier for me to stop. It might be easier for me to just, it's tough. Jesus will still love me, which is true. But following Jesus, walking on the water with Jesus, that's tough. And it requires a lot, and it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of courage. I lose friends. I have trials. I have tribulations. They're tough. But here's my thing to you. Don't quit. Don't bail. Don't stop. Don't give up. Because I genuinely believe that Jesus, walking on the water with Jesus, is the best place for you to be. It's so easy to quit. It's so easy. And sometimes we go, well, why would I keep doing it? Why would I keep pushing when it's so hard? When it might just be so much easier for me to just kind of sit this one out. I can be on the sideline. I can support. But why do I want to be on the field? Why would I want to play? Why would I want to be on the water with Jesus? And here's why. Jesus' half-brother James said it this way. In James 1:12, he said, blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him. And maybe for you, I want the crown of life. Maybe you don't, but I'm telling you, what I've learned is the best place that I can be what I'm called to do, the best place for me to be in my entire life is where Jesus has called me to be. And I want to be in that place. And what I got to do then is walk on the water with Jesus. It might be tough, it might be scary, it might be hard, but I learned if I walk on the water with Jesus, it might be tough, but it's still where Jesus has called me to be. And a lot of times we make it really difficult. We go, man, it's tough to turn to Jesus. You know, like if I were to quit, why would I still want to turn to him? That's tough. But I think what Jesus is saying here is not that you can fall and not that you can struggle, because you can. Those are real things. But what's amazing is that Jesus, if you look at that passage, what Jesus does, it says Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him. It wasn't that Jesus waited for a while for him to sink, for him to drown, which is sometimes what we feel. It's kind of easy to go, why do I feel like when I'm struggling, Jesus is far away? I think there's an Old Testament proverb. I quoted it last time. I totally forgot it. But what it says is, when I feel the farthest from Jesus because I'm struggling, is actually the closest when God is. There's also the idea that he draws near, he chases, he follows, he looks for those that are struggling, those that are not doing well, those that are sinking. But what's amazing is Peter is sinking, and Peter is the closest to Jesus. So, I ask you, are you willing to cry out to Jesus? I think sometimes it can be tough. It can be kind of hard. It can be a little embarrassing even, because people look at you and go, oh, Jesus is your crutch. And sometimes you can go, yeah. Because something beautiful that my mom always said, or I think it was my mom, who said, the only way to walk with Jesus is out on the water. There's no other way. You can't walk with Jesus in the boat, but you can walk with him out on the water. Sometimes you can even walk across the lake with Jesus. You can even do what some people will look at and you go, how did he get there? Like, how did they do that with their life? And you go, it was Jesus. I chose to walk with Jesus even when it was tough, even when it didn't make sense, even when people looked at me and was like, what's wrong with that guy? That guy's weird. That guy's not normal. Why are they doing that? It's because I choose to follow the one who is the master. It comes with this humility of understanding that I'm not the master of my circumstances. I can't control my problems. I can't control my circumstance. I can't control my situations. I can't control my family. I can't even control my finances. I can't control your social life. I can't control my work. I can't control any of these things. But I know the one who does. Not just can, but does. He's in control. And what we can do is we can choose to let Jesus, the master of those circumstances, the master of the winds and the waves and the storms in our life, we can choose to let him catch us. My dad used to call this the catch of God. Do you want to experience the catch of God? Because the truth is he's sure-handed. He's like Odell Beckham. That dude doesn't drop. He's got hands. He's not going to drop you. He's not going to let you go. He's not going to miss. He's not going to let you sink. He'll catch you. And you can experience what it means to be loved and held by God. Rather than yourself, rather than trying to control it and fix it yourself, he can be the one that's in control of you and your circumstances. So, my last thing is don't settle for the wind and the waves. It's so easy to focus. You might maybe lose focus on Jesus. Heck, you might have refocused on your circumstances, your situations. Heck, you might even be following those things. But what I can tell you is Jesus is still close to you. Jesus is there. Maybe you don't know Jesus, and for the first time you can actually see what it would be like to actually for the first time put your eyes on Jesus. But what I say to you is don't be afraid. Don't be afraid, because you don't want to regret one day saying, man, I should have trusted Jesus. I should have put my trust and my circumstances in his hands, because he's the one that's in control. He's the one that's sure-handed. Let's pray. Jesus, thank you for being a God who doesn't simply save us, who doesn't simply be there for us, but you're a God that sanctifies. You're a God that sustains us. You don't just save us, but you sustain us. Thank you for being a God who wants to use us. Thanks for being a God who's willing to use us. We don't deserve it, but you're willing to use us, and you want us to walk on the water with you. Because even when we sink or we fall, we know that you're there to catch us. So help us to live in that reality, to live in the truth that even if we fall, even if we sink, we know that you're there to catch us. Help us to keep our eyes on you at all times, even when it's hard, even when the winds are crashing. Heck, even when it feels like a 50-foot tidal wave. Help us to keep our eyes on the master of the winds and the waves. Because even when our lives are hard, even when the storms are raging in our life, the wind's howling, you don't change. So help us to remember who you are and what you do. We love you and we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.